Good evening, parents. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening for a brief, what I hope will be brief. I'm hoping that'll be about 30 minutes, introduction and background to our upcoming parent member SGB elections. I think there's about just over 30 people, 30 parents when last I checked. So my deep thanks to those parents for signing on. I'm sitting in my office at the school. Hopefully there will be no technical glitches. We've got a couple of guys in the background, Mr. Olive and Mr. Murison, just ensuring that that is the case. And the format, in essence, will be I'll take you through 7 or 8 slides regarding the upcoming parent member SGB elections. You're welcome to type any questions or comments into the comment bar in YouTube. And at the end of the presentation, I'll circle back to those questions and hopefully try and answer them to my best of my ability. So, as I say, my thanks for being here. In years gone past, this would have taken a very different format of having to get in your car, drive through to JP and listen to us speak, and perhaps all in all a round trip of about 2 hours. So my hope is that with technology, we can save you some significant time, plus in the comfort of your home or your offices. So again, my thanks for being here. So let me just proceed. So that's the brief agenda. As I say, just 7 or 8 slides, so it shouldn't take too much of your time, roughly 20 minutes to half an hour. So just some background to these elections, why we're having them. These are national elections. They are set by the Department of Education. All public schools in all provinces throughout South Africa are required to hold governing body elections once every 3 years. In the case this year, these elections have to be held within the month of March, which is slightly complex because obviously we break up on the 20th of March, so it curtails the available dates for the elections, but there are elections that are held by all the public schools. And obviously, at the risk of stating the obvious, and I guess I'm preaching to the converted, given that you're online this evening, listen to me. It's vitally important that the community participates in these elections in order to ensure the smooth running, governance, functioning of a school. So, one of the intentions of an evening like tonight is to encourage that participation. We will obviously make this presentation available to parents. We'll send it out via a letter tomorrow, which is another advantage of technology, in that parents who can't attend this evening, have forgotten about it, who otherwise occupied, will be able to view it at a later stage so that information won't be lost. The elections are run obviously from a national perspective, but then the individual provinces also promulgate their election legislation. Unfortunately, from a Gauteng Department of Education perspective, the Department of Education hasn't managed to promulgate these election requirements, the legislation associated with these SGB elections in time, and therefore we revert back to the latest promulgated legislated election legislation, which was for the 2021 elections that took place 3 years ago. That does have some practical implications, as I'll allude to in the next slide. So just for those of you who aren't clear, and again, I think I'm preaching to the converted, but the risk of stating the obvious, the commitments, responsibilities, benefits of being a parent SGB member. Firstly, from a remuneration perspective, don't get too excited when you see that word popping up. The remuneration is precisely nil. There are no financial benefits whatsoever other than the odd refreshment during governing body meetings. So you do get a bite to eat and something to drink during our governing body meetings, but that's pretty much where it stops from a benefits perspective or any kind of privileges. Your sons don't get into higher sporting teams. Their academic results aren't adjusted in any way. They are not seen favorably, unfavorably. In fact, many of the parents on the SGB, I'm not sure their boys even realize they sit on the SGB. And so from a remuneration, privileges, sorry to disappoint anyone, but certainly in the JP context and in terms of the law, there are pretty much no benefits, no remuneration, no privileges to being an SGB member. You really are, in the true sense of the word, serving. And it is really a service to the community, to, I think, firstly, as schools should always be, to the boys, to the learners. And in many ways, it's quite a thankless task. It is quite rewarding to know that you're making a difference. Hopefully, you are serving in a highly functioning school that is serving your boys well and in some way giving back to that community and to the privilege and the opportunities which your boys are enjoying. So from a time commitment, our SGBs typically meet once a term. There are subcommittees who meet around that. For example, we have a subcommittee, a FinCom, Finance Committee. There are occasional school governing body hearings on which parents preside over those school governing body hearings. We have a healthy and vibrant patrons committee and patrons association. So there is subcommittees which do meet outside of the termly meeting by the full SGB. But really, you're probably looking at a time commitment on a monthly basis of no more than 3 or 4 hours. Those who hold office, the chairman, the deputy chairperson, and the treasurer in particular, there is also a secretary, but those 4 office bearers may, particularly from a chairman perspective, have a higher burden in terms of time and commitment. But your normal parent members, really, it's no more than 2 or 3 hours, certainly in the context of our school. That may be different in other schools where there's different demands or higher expectations from governing body members, but in our school, it's a time commitment of no more than 2-3 hours a month. And in terms of expertise, there are obviously those who are professionals. Accountants are always welcome on our FinCom. It's always good to have a legal person on the governing body. But equally, I spoke to a parent today who's a pastor in a church, and he can certainly add huge value if you've got business experience, if you come from an educational background. And so I think the rule of thumb is that as diverse and as experienced a governing body you have, the more functioning and the better served that governing body will be to the school. So again, looking for parents with skills and particular professions, but equally looking for people who want and have a serving heart and want to give back to our school and our community. This governing body will stand for the period from effectively once the governing body has nomination or election process concluded at the end of March until the end of 2026. So they stand in place for a 3-year period. The next governing body elections will probably take place at the beginning of 2027. So you are standing for a 3-year period, and the office bearers, the chairman, deputy, etc., get elected every year. But once elected onto the school governing body as a parent member, you then stay for the full year period, unless, of course, your son matriculates or leaves the school during that time, in which case you become ineligible. And then from a public high school perspective, certainly a high school of our size and type, we have 9 parent members. So a lot of you may have come from a primary school where there were 6 parent members on this SGB, but in a high school context, there are 9 parent members. As you see in point 3 on this slide, there are 8 other non-parent members. The parent members are always meant to be in the majority on our school governing body of 17 members. The other 8 members comprise 3 educator representatives, 3 representatives from the learners, typically via the RCL or similar structures. The principal, the headmaster, sits in an ex officio capacity. So in other words, if the principal leaves the school, he doesn't remain a member of the SGB. That then moves to whoever occupies a seat of principal, and 1 non-educator staff member. In other words, the ground staff, the admin staff, and the like. So we are looking for 9 parent members. As you'll see later, we're very blessed that of our 9 current SGB members, 1 parent left at the end of last year, and the other 8 parents have made themselves available for re-election. They obviously got to go through the nomination process, but we're very blessed to have a very stable, very experienced school governing body. That's not to say that it would be wonderful to have new nominations, but we have been fortunate for a number of years to have a very stable, experienced SGB. In terms of the voters' role, all parents taking part in the SGB elections have to be on the voters' roll. And I would really encourage parents, if you do intend voting, please just take a stop past Mrs. Thompson, my PA, past her office sometime in the the next couple of weeks before the election process takes place, and just ensure that your name is on that voters roll. If you don't have time to come past the school, if your son's a boarder, for example, I have put on the letter that was sent out on Friday, you should have received that letter, all the parents, the letter sent out on Friday. I have put the details of Mr. Radebe, who is in our academic administration office, and you can phone him and just confirm that you are on that voters roll. But that voters roll, I think, contains the names of about 1,663 parents. We have the just under 1,000 unique families here, because obviously if you have 2 or more boys in the school, the parents of those boys can only vote once. So we have about just over 1,000 families, and we're missing about 300 names of second parents. Obviously, in some cases, that's entirely explainable if it's a single parent family, or if there was unfortunately a death in the family. But in other cases, I think that the second parent, we don't have their details. And I really want to emphasize that in order to vote in this election, parents' names do need to appear on the voters roll. And again, I'd strongly encourage you to reach out to Mrs. Thompson if you're at the school, to just check that voters roll, which is in her office, or to Mr. Radebe, whose email and details are on that letter, just to make sure, as I say, that your name's on that voters roll. For our parent member election, we do require a quorum of 15% of those parents who are on our voters roll. And as I say, at about 1,660 odd parents, if you times that by the quorum required of 15%, it is roughly 250 parents. I think it's 249 parents that are required to vote in that SGB election, which, as I'll get to just now, is one of the main reasons we've chosen the format of election that we have. You don't require a quorum for a nomination meeting, and you don't require a quorum should we be required to go to a second SGB parent member election because we didn't receive a quorum in the first. I'll explain that in a bit more detail later on. And then also important to realize, although I am speaking to you tonight about some of the background and the format and the process and answering some questions, in actual fact, the school governing body elections for both parent members and other members is actually not run by the principal. It's run by what's called the school electoral officer, which is typically the headmaster of one of our neighboring schools. And Mr. Sabir from Jules High, who is nominated, we've always been paired with Jules High for the last 4 elections that I've been involved with. Mr. Sabir is our school electoral officer. He's actually one of the participants or listeners in tonight's presentation. So Mr. Sabir and his team from Jules High will actually be the face that you see on the various election processes on the election day, and he will be driving the process with obviously support and input from myself, but I will be largely in the background. Obviously, from tonight's perspective, in order to bring our parents up to speed, to answer any questions, it would be more appropriate for me to do this presentation than him. But Mr. Sabir will certainly take over when the election proper begins. So there are 3 options available in theory for a parent member election. The first is your traditional method. That's the method that I think many primary schools would have used in the past, where parents have come from. It's certainly the method that JPR School for Boys has used in the past, and that's typically where parents would come in an evening or a weekend. They would have a nomination meeting. They may have decided to open nominations for a period of time before that evening, but they would typically have a nomination meeting where additional nominations are taken from the floor. And half an hour later, after collating and printing ballot papers, depending on how many people get nominated from the floor, that takes a bit of time, they would then have an election meeting. The reason we haven't opted for that approach is that it is very difficult in our context with 300 boarders, parents living often quite far from the school. We are not, in the traditional sense, a community school, with many of our parents living across the greater Johannesburg region with the inherent dangers nowadays of load shedding, etc., and driving at night, and just the inconvenience of getting parents out for an evening. Although many of our parents do come out, as we see in the AGMs, to get 250 parents would be extremely difficult, time consuming, and I would submit not particularly convenient. And so we felt that another option, which is the extended, the all-day option, often called the all-day option, which many of the public boys' schools in our country have voted for. I was at a headmasters meeting last week, and many of the public boys' schools like King Edward's, obviously ourselves, have chosen the extended format, which I'll explain a little bit later. And the third format, in theory, although it has an asterisk, the online format, is actually not available to us because in the 2021 regulations, that wasn't an option. And the 2024 regulations, as I mentioned earlier, have not been promulgated in time in our province. In other provinces, such as the Western Cape, I know a number of the boys' schools are choosing that option because those regulations were promulgated in time. But in our case, that's not an option. It may be an option in 2027. But for now, we've chosen, although it is required to be approved by the head of department of the Gauteng Education Department, so a letter went to him requesting approval and the rationale and the management plan for this extended format, and we await his response. So there is a caveat that he does have to approve this method, and should he not approve this method, we'll then have to cross that bridge or perhaps go the traditional route. But my hope and my understanding from my colleagues within the Department of Education is that they will approve this route, and if they do so, we will then choose the extended option. And as I say in the presentation there, the rationale for that extended option is, one, it caters for our boarding parents, because as you'll see in the next slide, the timeline, we are hoping to receive approval for the election process to happen on the afternoon of Sunday, the 3rd of March, and then all day on Monday, the 4th of March. On Sunday, the 3rd of March, it will give parents dropping off their boys who are boarders, of which, as I say, we have over 300 boys. It'll give them the opportunity to vote rather than having to then come back on the Monday, which obviously for those parents is hugely inconvenient. So that is the first reason. The second is that parents dropping their boys at school, fetching them in the morning, fetching them after school in the afternoon, or fetching them after sport later in the afternoon, early evening, will also be able to vote. And hopefully that will be convenient for those parents too. They won't have to come specifically into the school in the evening. They will be able to vote whilst dropping their boys, picking up their boys, or fetching them after sport. It's obviously less intrusive. There's a lot less time involvement. So, the process of voting will probably take you no more than 5 to 10 minutes. We'll allow parents to, for example, park on our top field, so you won't have to park in the street. Walk across to our Payne Hall, which is our original school hall in the old school building. Vote, and it's a very simple voting process, which I'll talk you through a little bit just now, and then hopefully be in and out within, as I say, 5 to 10 minutes. So a lot less intrusive than a 2-hour nominations meeting, waiting for elections to be held, and then elections thereafter, and having to potentially wait for the announcement of successful candidates. So hopefully that will be a lot more convenient to our parent body. We have a greater likelihood as a result of achieving a quorum and not having to ask people to come back 2 weeks later. My apologies, by the way, if there's some background noise, as is always the case in a school. There's always boys playing and running around and being boisterous. So my apologies for that, if that's a little bit frustrating for parents, if you can use that, if you can hear that. And then, as I say, just to give parents some assurance, this is a method that a number of the boys' public schools are adopting for all of those above reasons. That, for those who are interested, is the timeline. So we obviously informed parents not on the 19th, actually. On the 16th, we sent that letter out. If you haven't got that letter, I have checked that it did go out and that all parents received it. So perhaps have a look in your emails or your spam. As I've mentioned, the voters' roll is then available for inspection from today onwards. I had a couple of parents coming in today to actually check that voters' roll. The 6 p.m. tonight is the online meeting to explain the nomination election process. From tomorrow morning, we'll open then that nomination process, and that process will then close on Friday at 2 o'clock. Obviously, because we're not opting for a traditional election method, we can't have a nomination meeting prior to the election, because that election is over an extended period of a number of hours. It would make no sense to get parents to come in for the nomination meeting and then get them to come back a few hours later for the election. So as a result, the nomination process needs to precede that election process by some time, some days. So in our case, we will open that nomination process at 8 o'clock tomorrow morning, and it'll stay open till Friday at 2 o'clock, the close of school on Friday. You can get that nomination form either by coming into the school, and again, just coming to Mrs. Thompson's office, and she will gladly give you a nomination form, or by simply sending an email to her and requesting that nomination form. I think it's in the letter, but in case not, or in case parents are confused, very easy to just send an email to HMS, Headmaster's Secretary, at jpboys.coza, and Mrs. Thompson will gladly send you a nomination form. We will then obviously collate those nominations, or the school electoral officer, Mr. Sabir, will, after 2 o'clock on Friday. Those who have been nominated will then be given the opportunity to present a 2-minute video, and we'll do a small written bio, which gives voting parents, a little bit of background on those individuals who have been nominated, what grade their sons are in, their governing body experience, what they think they can add value to the school. There'll be a standard sort of set of prompts, 2-minute videos, and a little bio so that parents can see who they're voting for. And that process will obviously take 3 or 4 days to get that information back from the nominees. So I intend getting that information back in a week from now. We will then send that, by the end of that following week, by the 29th, we'll send that information out to the parent body so that they can see in advance who they're voting for. And then that voting will then take place, as I say, on the Sunday from 3 to 6. Obviously, if you're not a boarding parent, but you still wish to vote and it's more convenient for you, you're most welcome to do so. And then on the Monday from 7 a.m. when parents are dropping off boys until 6 p.m. when they collect them. Subject, as I said, to the caveat that we require approval from the HOD, but the legal advice and the research and the people that I've spoken to said that that approval will be forthcoming. So hopefully that is the case. And then if we don't get a quorum, if we don't get 249 parents to vote in that first election, there's then a second election which needs to take place 14 days after the first election. Because we break up on Wednesday the 20th, it doesn't leave us a lot of time. And we will have that on the evening of the 18th of March. In that case, it won't be an extended election. It'll be an in-person election. And there we don't require a quorum, ironically. So if there's 5 or 10 parents that pitch for that evening, that election on the 18th, they then vote on the school governing body. So obviously, ideally, we want to try and get a quorum on the 4th of March, or 3rd and 4th of March, so to obviate the necessity to come in on the 18th. But if we do come on the 18th, we didn't want to take parents through an extended election, all the logistics and the rigmarole of that. And because you don't require a quorum, it will be quite a quick, and you've already had all the nominations, it will be quite a quick election on the 18th. But my real hope is that we don't require that. So that's a little bit of the time frame and the background. A reminder, if you have any questions, please type them in the comment box, and I will get to those at the end of the presentation. This is, I think, the second last slide, so on track to finish in the next 5 minutes or so. From a nomination perspective, as I mentioned, available in Mrs. Thompson's office, there's the email address which I gave previously. Nomination period again from 8 o'clock tomorrow morning until Friday the 23rd at 2 p.m. That gives a nice 3-day window period for nominations to come in, which I think is more than sufficient. And when you have completed that nomination form, it's important that you return that to Mrs. Thompson within that period, between 8 o'clock tomorrow morning and 2 o'clock on Friday, the 23rd. At that time, they'll be placed into a sealed nomination box. So we'll take a nomination form and place it into the box. Very, very important, that nomination form, it is quite obvious from the form, but I have had situations in the past where we have had forms that haven't been signed by, for example, a seconder, or a person nominates themselves. It's very important that if you do wish to stand on the SGB, you cannot nominate yourself. You have to get a parent on the voters roll to nominate you. You have to get a parent on the voters roll to second you, and you then have to accept the nomination, obviously. Otherwise, people could find themselves getting nominated without their consent. So there's 3 signatures required on that form: a nominating parent, a seconding parent, and consent from the parent who's nominated. It's fairly simple form, very easy to fill out, but very important that those 3 factors are taken into account. And then if you ensure that you bring them back by Friday, 2 p.m., and they will then get put into the nomination box. And as again, just to emphasize that all 3 of those parents, those nominating, seconding, and standing for a member of the SGB, all have to be on the voters roll. So critically important, again, that parents do check that your name is on the voters roll. Please don't assume it is. In the vast majority of cases, it is on the voters roll, but I know every now and then that we don't have particularly a second parent. So if parents could just check that if you do intend, hopefully participating in the election and the nomination process. From an election perspective, as I say, again, I'm caveating this with the fact that it does require HED approval, but that will take place in our Payne Hall from Sunday afternoon on Sunday the 3rd. It's a very, very busy weekend. I know it's our open day on the Saturday. It's SA Champs rowing from the Friday to the Sunday. It's our Ken Short under 14 basketball weekend, water polo weekend. It's our under 14 basketball weekend. So it's an incredibly busy weekend for the staff and for parents and boys. But because of those very tight time frames I referred to earlier, we felt we didn't have much choice, but we couldn't delay it for a week, for example. So in some respects, it may actually suit parents because many of you may be on campus dropping boys off, and we hope that is the case, that we can get 100 or 200 of our boarding parents, or maybe even day boy parents who live in the area, and it's more convenient to vote on the Sunday afternoon. If allowed by the HOD, we can go some way to achieving our quorum. And then on Monday, I'd really encourage Monday the 4th, parents, you're dropping your sons off, come through. We'll make sure the McDonald Street gates open, park on the top field, walk across, vote, maybe have a quick cup of coffee from the tuck shop or the coffee or the coffee van, and you'll be in and out within 5-10 minutes. So I'd really encourage that. But that's meant to be the process. It does say Memorial Hall. I apologize. I've changed that to the Payne Hall because on the Monday we have assembly in our Memorial Hall, and I think Payne Hall is probably a bit more conducive as well, but more sort of friendly and easier to control. So it will be in the Payne Hall, not the Memorial Hall. I will make that change when sending out this presentation. I've spoken about the videos and the written bios that'll be available both before, we'll send that out to parents, and available at the voting station. We'll have Chromebooks set up so that parents, if you're not sure who's standing or you want to get a bit of an insight into the parents you're voting for, remember you have to vote for 9 parents. You can't vote for more than 9, otherwise you'll spoil your ballot. But you must vote for, you're voting for 9 parents. You can actually vote for less, but you certainly can't vote for more. That will spoil your ballot. And you'll be able to view that at the voting on the Monday the 4th. You must bring as proof of identity either the green ID book or the barcoded ID card or your passport. So, those are the forms of identification which, in terms of the regulations, are required. So please do remember to bring that. I've reiterated again that you need to be on the voters roll. The school electoral officer will actually take responsibility for counting votes and confirming which members have been elected. That's not principal's responsibility. I've mentioned the quorum. Please note that proxy votes aren't allowed. So I appreciate there might be some frustration in that. If your wife is working and only one of you are going to drop your son off, that ideally she would be able to give you her proxy and you'll be able to vote twice. Unfortunately, the regulations state that no proxy votes are allowed, and there's a maximum of 2 parents per learner. So if there's a divorce situation, unfortunately, we can't have 4 parents voting. If you've got 3 boys or 2 boys in the school, you don't get to vote twice. You only get 1 vote as parents, irrespective of how many boys you have in the school. I think that speaks to most of the election process. As I've mentioned, if we're required to have a second election because we don't have a quorum, the only exception to that rule is if we only have 9 nominated parents. If there's only 9 nominated parents, and remember we've got 8 of our current SGB who've made themselves available for re-election. So if we only have 9 nominated parents, we don't require an election process. So we'll know that by obviously 2 o'clock on Friday the 23rd. We will then notify parents that we don't require an election process. Because there's only 9 nominated parents, those parents are then duly elected. So then it doesn't matter if there's a quorum or no quorum, you're not going to go through election process. If, however, there's more than 9 parents nominated, we will go through the election process. If there's no quorum of 15%, then as mentioned earlier, we will have a second election on the evening of Monday, the 18th of March, 6 p.m. at the school. It'll be, as mentioned earlier, an in-person election. Ironically, rightly or wrongly, no quorum is required then. And so, whoever turns up at that second election has the very weighty responsibility then of electing the SGB. And very important to realize, there's no new nominations allowed. So the nomination process closed on the 23rd. Even if we aren't successful with our quorum and we have more than 9 parents at that first election, there's no reopening of the nomination process. So the nominations will be as they were at 2 o'clock on the 23rd. And then important to note as well that we as a school in the past, and the legislation, the regulations do allow to co-opt members for a period of time. So particularly if you have certain skills, if you've got financial skills, for example, or legal skills that we think may be useful in our SGB, there is the opportunity to co-opt parents. So for example, if there's more than 9 nominees and there's some parents with fantastic skills, we often are reluctant to lose those skills and the servant heart of those parents. And so we often would co-opt those parents and, into our various subcommittees like FinCom or our disciplinary committee, or if we have any legal issues, we'll make use of those parents with a legal background. So, I would encourage you, even if you're saying to yourself, there's 8 parents making themselves available for election, what's the point? I would still encourage you, if you do have a servant heart and you do want to get involved and you want to serve the community, that you do consider getting nominated, accepting the nomination should someone nominate you, and making yourself available. We can always make use of involved parents. We can always make use of parents with expertise. We can always make use of parents with a servant heart, particularly if you're a grade 8 or 9 parent. In high school, which is only 5 years compared to primary school, which is 7. As soon as a learner matriculates, that parent becomes ineligible. And so we often face over a 3-year period parents who progressively become ineligible. And so grade 8 and 9 parents are very valuable because they are obviously going to be here, hopefully, for the next 3-year period. So grade 8 and 9 parents, if you are listening in and you're not sure what being on the governing body entails, or you're not sure who's on the governing body, please also drop past in the next 2-3 days at my office, and I'm very happy to have a 5-minute chat and answer any questions you may have. We'd love to have you involved on our governing body and at the school. And so that brings us to the conclusion of the presentation. That was about 30 minutes, so as promised. I know I've spoken a lot in those 30 minutes, but hopefully it's been valuable. I will just shoot across now to the comment section. I see that as of a minute ago, there are no questions yet. We had about 70 viewers. So that's more than I thought. When I held this in person 3 years ago, I think I had 7 parents. So from that perspective, we've 10 times our viewership. So in that regard, hopefully it's been a success. Hopefully not having to drive and get in your car's been appreciated, and being able to watch this in the comfort of your home has been a blessing. From my perspective, I really appreciate all the parents who did log on and who have expressed a desire to at least know more. Even if you choose not to make yourself available for SGB election, it's still important that you know the structures that run our school, the governance that's in place, the quality of our parent members, because as being in the majority in our school governing body, it's the legislation designed that the parents have the biggest say. So we always want invested, servant-hearted, skilled parents, and I'm grateful to all of you who joined us this evening. So I'm going to give another 30 seconds or so just to see if any questions come through. Whereafter, if there is none, I will consider the meeting closed. I'll stop the recording in the meeting, and we will then send out this recording within the course of the next day or two to all parents, so that if you did miss anything or you weren't sure or you want to repeat it, you can have a look at the recording. And likewise, Should any of you want clarification, you're most welcome to pop past my office to ask questions of either myself or Mrs. Thompson if I'm not here, or Mr. Murison. If we're not here, we'll certainly come back to you. If you're looking to get involved in the school, I'd really encourage you to put your hand up. We always, as I say, looking to have servant-hearted parents with expertise and a love of our school and our boys to get involved. There's still no questions, and so I'm therefore going to close the presentation. Thank you again for making the effort to be here. It's greatly appreciated. And as I say, if you do have any follow-up questions, you are most welcome to ask either myself or the senior management, and we'll gladly come back to you. Thank you for your participation. I look forward to you hopefully also getting involved in participating in the elections. And for those of you who are considering standing, I hope that that you do so, and that we have a vibrant, experienced, energetic, passionate, servant-hearted school governing body as a result for the next 3 years. Thank you for your time, parents. Have a good evening.